Welcome everyone to Fruits of the Orchard, Parshat Vayechi, the last parsha of Sefer Bereshit. The Shabbos will say, Chazak, Chazak, v'nit chazek. Be strong, and be strengthened. As we move into Parshat, the book of Shemot, and into slavery. So we need chazak, v'nit chazek. So in Fruits of the Orchard, for those who have, there's 2 articles this week. And we're going to be doing both of them. Try to split the time between both of them. So the context is Yaakov is sick, and word gets to Yosef. He brings his 2 sons to get blessings before Yaakov is going to pass away. And then afterwards, Yaakov gives blessings to all of his sons. He passes away. His body is brought back to Israel for burial. And we're going to be dealing with just really one detail of the blessings that Yaakov gave to the 2 sons of Yosef, Manasseh and Ephraim. One thing we can say is that it's very significant, these blessings, because this is the source of the custom for parents to bless their children every Friday night and every Yontif, but especially Friday nights. And it comes from this episode, from this whole incident. So it's very, very significant. The detail that we're going to deal with is that, so when Yosef brings his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, Manasseh is the elder, he's the Bechor, the firstborn. Ephraim is the younger. So Yosef places Manasseh on his left and Ephraim on his right, with the expectation that he's facing Yaakov. So because Manasseh is on his left, he will be on Yaakov's right. And because Ephraim is on his right, he will be on Yaakov's left. So his expectation is Yaakov will go like this, and therefore his right hand will be on Manasseh, and his left hand will be on Ephraim. But the text says what he does is this. He crosses his hands, and he puts his right hand on Ephraim and his left hand on Manasseh. And then, as it's written in the Torah, Yosef says, Abba, that's not right. I hate to correct you, but you should put your right hand on Manasseh and your left hand on Ephraim. And Yaakov responds and says, Yadati b'ni yadati. I know, my son, I know what I'm doing. Because Ephraim, even though he's the younger, he will be greater than Manasseh. Manasseh will also be great, but Ephraim will be even greater. And so that's the whole incident. So what I want to delve into is, what is the meaning on a deeper level of the crossing of the hands? Because we know that every word of the Torah, every letter of the Torah, every detail of the Torah has eternal significance. And so in so many cases, we ask, why do we need to know this? What does it mean to us? So what we're going to do is we're going to try to understand the deeper meaning of the crossing of the hands. And so, first of all, it should be mentioned that one of the reasons that this becomes the paradigm of blessing our children is that we know throughout the whole book of Vayechi, which we're ending this parsha, we have pairs of brothers time after time fighting with each other, and especially over the idea of who's the firstborn. We had Cain and Abel. We had Yishmael and Yitzchak. We had Esav and Yaakov. We had the brothers and Yosef. And now here is Yaakov, who's crossing his hands, and he's putting the younger in front of the elder. And up to now, every time that's happened, it's led to quarrels. Some of those quarrels are still happening today. We're not going to go back into it, but the whole stories of Yishmael and Yitzchak have a direct bearing on the reality of today between Islam and Judaism, between the Arabs and the Jews, and between Esav and Yaakov has to do with Christianity and Judaism. That we're not going to go back into. But here, Yaakov says specifically, the Ephraim will be greater than Manasseh. And yet what we see is there's no arguing here. We don't see Manasseh taking revenge. We don't see any ramifications of Yaakov putting Ephraim before. So that becomes a symbol of peace between the brothers. Remember, we're just getting over the selling of Yosef. And here we have it could be an explosive situation. What do you mean you're putting Ephraim before Manasseh? Manasseh is the firstborn. And yet it ends in peace. And that sets a precedent for the next two pairs of brothers who take this peace to a whole different level. And that's Aharon and Moshe. And we could throw in Miriam also, because both Miriam and Aaron are older than Moshe. And all three of them were prophets, had prophecy. And here we see not only does Aaron accept that Moshe is the greater, he's so happy that he's the greater. And we see that at one point at the burning bush, Moshe said to God, pick Aaron, he's greater than me. Not just that he's older. Moshe really felt he was greater. So Ephraim and Manasseh begin this very important rectification, this tikkun. And Moshe and Aaron and Miriam, they continue this. So the first thing is we're going to try to understand a number of different levels, the crossing of the hands. So first of all, we have some physiology that is very, very interesting and important here. Even though it's counterintuitive, but we now know that the right brain rules the left half of the body, and the left brain rules over the right hand of the body. That's counterproductive. Why would we think that? Wouldn't we think that the right brain controls the right hand of the body and the left? But no, they cross. And we see this also, it's a little bit different. Here it's not in a horizontal, it's vertical. We're told now that the retina, when it sees upside down. And we don't experience that. We experience seeing things right side up, even though the sages say this is an upside down world. There's a famous statement of the sages. They say this is an upside down world, meaning that which you would expect to be on top is on the bottom, and that which you would expect to be on the bottom is on the top. Upside down world. So here we have two, in biology and physiology, this concept of the switching of the hands. Now, this switching of the hands is a concept that we have discussed in many, many different contexts. And that is, in English, the word inter-inclusion. In Hebrew, hit kalalut. And we've talked about this so many times because it's such an important concept that reality, it's not so much it's upside down, but reality is much deeper than a superficial look at whatever we're looking at. There's always a deeper level, something that's inter-included. You have to look deeper to see more and more levels. And the classic example of this is when we count the Omer. When we do Sfira to Omer, this is the classic example of Hit Kalalut, where each week we count 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuos, and each week represents one of the lower 7 Sfirot, and every day represents 7 aspects of that midah of the week, of that attribute of the week. So the first day of counting the Omer is Chesed Sheba Chesed, and then it's Gevura Sheba Chesed, then Tiferet Sheba Chesed, and so forth and so on. We go through the 7 Sfirot, and they're all inter-included one in the other. And of course, this gives us a deeper understanding of everything. So this concept of Hit Kalalut is such an important concept. So in the Torah, the word that is given for the switching of the hands is sikel et yadav. Sikel comes from the word seichel, intellect. And Rashi says, and he brings Onkelos, he says, sikel et yadav, he did it with wisdom. In other words, when he said to Yosef, Yadati b'ni yadat, I know maybe what you're thinking, but I know what I'm doing. So in other words, it wasn't a, what we'll call a stam action, a spontaneous action that once Yosef pointed out to him, he said, oh, yeah, you're right. I should have my right hand here and my left hand there. So Rashi says it was done also with dat. He says with wisdom and with dat that he did this. So the idea of sikel et yadav here was a physical action, which was a reflection of a thought process. And Rashi explains why he did this. It is because he saw in prophecy, Yaakov saw prophetically that Menashe would be great. And so Rashi mentions that Yaakov saw that Gidon, one of the judges who saved Israel at that time from our enemies, that Gidon would come from Menashe. So that's what Yaakov said, he'll be great. But he said, who will come from Ephraim? Yehoshua. Yehoshua takes over from Moshe. And he mentions, Rashi mentions that the name of Yeshua will be known throughout the world, and that he taught Israel Torah. And it's in the book of Yeshua, there's a verse that says the whole time that Yeshua led the Jews, everyone kept the Torah. There were no rebellions. No, there was one mishap in the city of Ai, but that was one person who took booty after a war that he was not supposed to. But the verse says that the whole time Yoshua was leading the Jewish people, they were loyal to the Torah. We don't see this, unfortunately, afterwards. We see through the books of the judges and Shoftim and Shmuel and Malachim, the kings. It wasn't always the case that everyone was following the Torah. So Yaakov saw this, and he saw that that's who would come from Ephraim. So now I just want to add, there's two concepts in the Gemara for something that's close to this idea of switching the hands. So the first one is called achlifu duchtayu. Achlifu comes from the word chalaf, to change, to switch. And duchtayu means their opinions. So what does this mean? It's a phrase that's used that when you have two sages, and of course we have what are called the pairs, the zugot, that for hundreds of years there were like two main teachers in Israel, and so much of the tradition is handed down through these pairs. And a lot of the disagreements also come from different pairs. So achlifu duchtayu means, I'm just going to use an example of Shammai and Hillel. In general, Hillel was more lenient. Shammai was more stringent. Now, this is not good and bad. It just means that their approach to halacha, one was more lenient, one was more stringent. But there are cases where achlifu duchtayu, where Hillel will be more stringent and Shammai will be more lenient. But since the general principle is the opposite, this is the term that the sages used, that they switched opinions. They switched opinions. And of course, this is not just Shammai and Hillel. You have many, many different pairs where they were very consistent in their approach to halacha, but the exception is when they would switch opinions. Let's say Rav and Shmuel. Rav would be very consistent in one way, Shmuel in another way, but in certain cases, they would actually switch. And then there's another term that's used, is ifcha mistabra. Ifcha mistabra, also ifcha comes from lafoch, to turn around. So here, this is not necessarily between two pairs of rabbis, but there's a discussion going on. And initially, we would think that the discussion is going to logically play itself out to a certain conclusion. But all of a sudden, in the middle of the discussion, it turns out what we first thought would be a logical conclusion, turns out it's just the opposite. And that's what the words mean. Ifcha mistabra. Mistabra means a svara, a reasoning. So we would think the reasoning would play itself out, would progress in a certain way. And all of a sudden we see it turns out to be just the opposite of what we initially thought. So these two Talmudic phrases is very, very similar to this idea of the switching of the hands. So now we could ask, well, where is the source of this? Where is the source of seeing something deeper, seeing an opposite energy? So I would like to trace it back to Avram Avinu. Why? We say that Avram was called Avram HaIvri. I believe we discussed this a few weeks ago. Why was he called the Hebrew, ha-ivri? Ivri comes from the word la'avor, to cross over. And it means that he crossed over the Euphrates when he left Ur Kasdim. And that was like a whole new world. And more significantly, he crossed over the line of idol worship, and he stood on one side of the world, and the entire rest of the world stood on the other side. So here, this idea of crossing over. So here, Yaakov is crossing his hands, but it's coming from a precedent. And that is the ability to see beyond the surface meaning. Because if Yaakov didn't have prophetic insight, why wouldn't he put his right hand on Manasseh and his left hand on Ephraim? It was only because he could see deeper. And so this idea of crossing over, in a sense, was initiated by Abraham. And really, the first case we see of it is in Parshat Toldot, and I'm sure we learned this in this series, is Parshat Toldot begins, Eila Toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham, Avram holid Yitzchak. These are the generations of Yitzchak, the son of Abraham. Abraham gave birth to Yitzchak. And as we learned, the second half of the verse is redundant. If I know it's Yitzchak, the son of Avram, then I know that Avram gave birth to Yitzchak. So why do we have to have the second part of the verse? So Rashi brings different explanations, but the Hasidic understanding is that at the Akedah, there was a inter-inclusion, a transference of energies between Avram and Yitzchak. Avram, whose main trait is chesed, in order to go through this test and pass this test, had to incorporate a tremendous level of gevura, which was Yitzchak's main trait. And Yitzchak, in order to allow himself to be bound to the altar, had to show an incredible love of Father and God. And so he was able to incorporate within himself the opposite midah of chesed. So this is talked about extensively in Kabbalah and Hasidut. And that's why I'm bringing this, is because what Yaakov did, in a sense, already the way was paved. This idea of being able to see and manifest the idea of inter-inclusion. So this, as I said, is such an important idea to learn to see beyond the superficial view of the world, the superficial understanding of the circumstances of our life, the way we look at other people, the way we look at our own soul. And that's why this whole idea is so important. Okay, now we're going to go to the second Torah of this parsha, which is called Animals, Humans, and Angels. So for those who have Fruits of the Orchard, you can look on page 144 and 145. I'm going to be reading from it because what I want to point out is, as we mentioned already, after Yaakov gives blessings to Ephraim and Manasseh, he then calls all of his sons together and says, gather around me, and I will reveal to you what will happen in the end of days. That's a pretty awesome statement, a very awesome statement. So what happened? So according to the Midrash, the Shekhinah left him. And that's actually one of the reasons this whole parsha is called a closed parsha. Parshat Stuma, a closed parsha. Why is it called a closed parsha? Well, if you look in a Sefer Torah, between all two parshas, there's a minimum of 9 spaces. The only exception is this parsha. In other words, where the last parsha ends and this one begins, there's no space in between. And therefore, it's called a closed parsha. Rashi brings a couple of explanations. Is because Yaakov is going to die in this parsha, and the beginning of slavery is going to follow very closely afterwards. And so therefore, the Torah is alluding to this by leaving no open space. We're about to go into a tight space. Remember, Mitzrayim comes from the word Meitzar, a narrow place. Okay, we're in Mitzrayim already, but it's only in the last parsha that Yaakov and the whole family come down. And for a number of years, life was good, but then it turned quickly into subjugation and slavery. And the second reason Rashi brings is what I just mentioned, that Yaakov said, I will reveal to you what will happen in the end of days, but it was closed off to him. Therefore, this is a closed parsha. But nonetheless, and this is not really the subject of this parsha, is in the blessings that Yaakov gives, it's full of prophecy. And if you read Rashi, Rashi will explain how so much of the blessings are actually hints of what Yaakov is seeing in the future, but he's just not revealing it in an open way. But our subject tonight is just a very, very interesting thing, is that so many of the blessings that Yaakov gives to his children, and later Moshe, before he dies, in the last parsha of the Torah, Zot HaBracha, they both use the metaphor of animals to describe the 12 tribes of Israel. So I'm going to read really quickly, but it's not like one or two of them. It's close to half of them have images of animals to describe them. Now, obviously, this is very symbolic language, metaphoric language, but what we want to understand, why the usage of animals? So very quickly, so this is the blessing that Yaakov gives to Yehuda. A lion cub is Yehuda. From the prey, my son, you withdrew. He crouched, rested like a lion, and like a lion who will rouse him. He binds his fowl to a vine, and to a tendril he binds his young donkey. He launders his garment with wine, and with the blood of grapes binds his raiment. Now, for those who are interested, if you go to, for those who have Orchard of Delights, there's a whole article about this particular blessing. And there we'll get an understanding of all of the symbology here. Because you read this and it's like, what kind of a blessing is this? You'll be like a lion, and you'll tie your donkey to the grapevine, and you'll launder your garment in wine. So we have to understand this is all symbolic prophetic idea. Orchard of Delights is the first book of this series that precedes Fruits of the Orchard, for those who don't know. But that bracha to Yehuda is all about Mashiach coming, all about Yehuda being the leader. I don't have the page in front of me in Orchard of Delights. It's Parshat Vayechi. If you remind me, when we get to the chats, I will try to give you the page. Okay, the next one, Yisachar is a bony donkey lying between the boundaries. Dan will be like a serpent on the road, a viper on the path, which bites the horse's heel, so its rider falls backwards. Like I say, if you have Rashi, and you start learning the Rashis, he explains the symbolism and the prophetic sight that Yaakov is revealing here. Naphtali is a swift gazelle who utters beautiful words. Benjamin, is a predatory wolf. In the morning, he will devour prey, and in the evening, he will distribute the spoil. So very, very quickly, I don't feel right about just passing over this. The Benjamin, it's all about the Beit HaMikdash and the sacrifices. That's what it's talking about. In the morning, he will bring his offering, and in the evening, really meaning at mincha time. And Naphtali, you should just know that this image of Naphtali is a swift gazelle. This is the symbol of the Israel post office. This idea of the swift gazelle. The males aren't always so swift, as some of you might know, but that's what it is. Dan will be a serpent on the road. There's a whole book that was written based on this one sentence, because Rashi says it is a prophecy about Shimshon. And it's by Rabbi Weiss. It's called The Struggle of Shimshon. And it's written with Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. It's called the Struggle of Shimshon. It is a brilliant book, all based on this one sentence. It's amazing. Dan will be a serpent on the road, a viper on the path, which bites the horse's heels, so its rider falls backwards. Okay, continuing with the imagery of animals. So when Moshe gives his blessings, so he gives a blessing to Yosef. His firstborn ox, glory is his. His horns are the horns of a ra'im, is a type of like an antelope. With them he will gore nations together to the ends of the earth. These are the myriads of Ephraim, and these are the thousands of Manasseh. And of God, he said, blessed is he who grants expanse to God. He dwells like a lion, tearing off the arm together with the head. And Dan, he said, Dan is a young lion leaping forth from Bashan. Now you'll notice that the lion comes up in 3 or 4 of these. 3 of the tribes are compared to lions, and it turns out that the symbol of Jerusalem is a lion. It's the Lion of Judah. So these symbols have had lasting effect. Many of these symbols of what we just read also end up on the flags of the 12 tribes in the desert. These become the symbols of the tribes. So now we want to understand what is the connection between the animals and the tribes. So here I'm going to put in one other thing that will complete the comparisons that we want to make, is that especially in the vision of Ezekiel, the first chapter of Ezekiel, and this imagery is taken and is mentioned in our daily morning prayers in Shachrit. And that is a whole class of angels called Chayot, Chayot HaKodesh. Now, Chayot is the plural of a singular animal. An animal is called a Chaya. A Chaya. Chayot is the plural. And so Ezekiel mentions many, many times that he envisioned this class of angels called the Chayot HaKodesh, the holy living beings. Now, the 5 names of the human soul from below to above are Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, V'Yechida. Chaya. So now we have animals are called Chaya, Chayot. One of the highest levels of the human soul is called Chaya. And this group of angels that it's not just mentioned once in Ezekiel, it's been incorporated into our daily prayers. Now, all 3 of them have this, are called by the same name, Chaya. Now, Chaya comes from the word Chai, life, life force. So here we see that animals, humans, and angels, they're all called by the same name. Now, there are many other types of angels that are not called Chayot HaKodesh, and Chaya is only one of the levels of the soul. And animals also are called by different names, but now we want to understand that, I'll read quickly, that the first time the word chaya is used is by the fish on the 5th day of creation. On the 5th day of creation, it says, and God said, let the waters swarm, a swarming of living creatures. What's the Hebrew for that? Nefesh chaya. And let fowl fly over the earth across the expanse of the heavens. So the fish, which is the first animal that is mentioned, is called the Nefesh Chaya, a living soul. On the 6th day, that's when the land animals are created. And it says like this, and God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kind, cattle and creeping things, and the beasts of the earth according to their kind. What are all the animals called? The same thing, Nefesh Chaya. Now, also on the 6th day, human beings are created. Adam is created. What does it say about Adam? And Hashem Elohim formed man of dust from the ground, and he breathed into his nostrils the soul of life. There it's called Nishmat Chayim. And man became a living soul, also a Nefesh Chaya. So here you might expect that the human being is going to be called something different than the fish and the animals. But it's not. But we have something that the others don't have, and that's called the nishmat chayim, the breath of life that was blown into the human being. That is the soul. And that is one above the animals. And what we'll learn in a second, it's also, this is almost ifchan mistabra. Because if we have a hierarchy of animals, humans, and angels, so our initial logical thought would be that the angels are the highest. But this is what we were talking about before. It's a beautiful way to connect the first part of this class to the second part. Ifcha destabra, it's actually opposite. It's actually the human being is considered on a higher level than the angels, which is initially we might not think that. And we'll see that in a second. So here we have this comparison, animal, human, and angel, all being called chaya. But the way we can understand it, there are many ways, but our initial way is chaya means life. It means life force. So animals have life force. Human beings have life force, and angels have life force. That is what's on the most simple level is comparing them. But with the animal and the human, we also have the word nefesh. And of course, that is the first level of the 5 levels of the soul. And it's always explained that the nefesh is sometimes called the nefesh bahamit, the animal soul. Why? Is because this level of soul is the most connected to the body and the needs of the body and the direction that the body is trying to lead us into. Now, this is not, it's not a moral statement. It's not a good or bad. It's just reality. And that's why, in a sense, a human being is an animal on a certain level. But we have something that animals don't have, and that's a nishmat chayim. And the Targum, when it translates nefesh chaya, translates it a speaking spirit. Ruach mimalala, a speaking spirit. And animals also communicate, but not in a complex manner. And so when we look at the different levels of the soul, so we have to earn them. It's a whole Torah from the Arizal. And I learned 2 different versions of what the Ari was teaching. In one version, he says that every human being is given a nefesh, and we have to earn the other 4 levels, the ruach, the neshama, the chayin yechida. In another Torah that Rav Ginsburg gives over from the Arizal, he says that every human being is given 2 levels, a nefesh and a ruach, but then has to earn the neshama, chayin yechida. Now, it doesn't mean that we perfect it. It doesn't mean that we necessarily really master the nefesh and the ruach. That's a lifetime endeavor. It's a 24/7 work that we're all involved with is trying to uplift and clarify and purify our different levels of the soul. But there is something that we do share with the animals, and that is this basic nefesh chaya. And so much of Chassidut and Musar, by the way, and Jewish philosophy is attempting to teach us how the Torah is a guidebook for mastering and directing and channeling the nefesh chaya. Because the nefesh chaya has tremendous potential, tremendous energy, tremendous kochot, strengths. But very simply, when they're not, when the moach shalit al halev, when the mind is not ruling over the body can go haywire, following its basic instincts. And the instincts are not bad. They're not bad. But when they're not channeled properly, they can drive us to the worst of the worst of the worst. The lowest depths. And we see this simply in the name of a human being, Adam. We've learned this many, many times, that you divide the syllables. The Aleph of Adam is the spiritual component, is the soul, is the Nishmat Chayim. And the Dam, which means blood, that is the animal soul, that is the body. And this is one of the basic reasons, but also the secret, why when we eat kosher meat, all of the blood has to be taken out of the meat. And the Torah repeats over and over again, don't eat the blood of an animal, because the nefesh of the animal is in the blood. And so therefore, that's why the importance of salting, why we have to salt and we draw out all of the blood, in order that we are consuming animals. Obviously, vegetarians and vegans don't want to do this, but even in kosher diet, if we eat meat, we're not eating the blood, which is the nefesh. And over millennium, this has a huge impact on what we'll call the Jewish body, in the genetics that is passed down from generation to generation. So when we talk about the animal soul, when we talk about animals, so animals are really programmed for two things: pleasure and survival. And it's not, animals can be very smart, can be very, very smart. And certain attributes of certain animals go way beyond human capabilities. Most animals hear ranges that a human being can't hear, see distances that a human being can't hear, organize themselves in societies that are far more organized than what human beings accomplish. But when it gets down to it, animals are programmed for pleasure and for survival. And along with this is giving birth to another generation. This is part of the survival. It's ingrained in animals that in a sense, part of their survival instinct is to give birth to a new generation. And in fact, many animals, especially let's say salmon, who will swim upstream, and actually some will return close to 4,000 miles. That many salmon in Alaska. I had the chance to be in Alaska in, what's the name? One of the cities in Alaska is called the salmon capital of the world. And we had the most amazing experience. We were taken to a river where you could practically walk on the salmon swimming upstream. It was astounding. It was absolutely astounding. And we were told that many of these salmon swim all the way almost to Japan. But when it comes time to spawn, they will come back to their birthplace and they'll spawn and then they die. It was incredible, absolutely incredible. And we saw a bear in the distance. It was standing there and it was just scooping up the salmon, just right, like right out of the water. It was just like, it was incredible. So human beings are also hard-drived for pleasure and survival. It's a positive thing. So we share something with the animal kingdom very, very deeply. And yet we have a thing called Kiddush Hashem, or Mesirut Nefesh, where a human being can supersede the need and desire to survive for a higher purpose. For a higher purpose. So now let's go back to the angels, because they're also called chayot. And when we try to envision, like, what is an angel? So because of Ezekiel and Isaiah, so they gave over in their books a concept of angels with wings. It didn't come out of just nowhere, this idea of angels with wings. It's Ezekiel saw angels with 4 wings. Isaiah saw them with 6 wings. But on a deeper level, an angel is a messenger. That's really what a malach means. And that's why in Parshat Vayishlach, where it says Yaakov sent messengers to his brother Esav. And Rashi says an incredible thing, malachim mamash. Real angels he sent. Now that doesn't mean that he didn't send flesh and blood messengers, but along with them, he also sent spiritual energies that we call angels. And that's one of the ways that we can define an angel. An angel is a energy body. It's a field force of energy. And that energy is a messenger from God, the upper worlds, to accomplish something. That's why angels are mostly associated with a purpose or a task. And so, again, we would think that angels, like, wow, they don't sin, and they're on such a high level, and they do God's bidding. What could be higher than that? Nonetheless, it's explained not only in Kabbalah and Chassidut, but in Haftarah of Hanukkah, the vision of Zechariah, where Zechariah sees angels, and God says, I will make you a walker amidst the ones who are standing here. And so that's understood, that what it means is that the angels are called standing, and the human being is called a walker. And it's explained how does that work? And the key here is free will. That, again, we might think, and there is a place for thinking this, that doing God's will without any free choice is a very high level. And that's why we say in Pirkei Avot, make his will your will. But still, we have to choose to make his will your will. The angels are created that they do God's will. And in fact, the famous statement that we make when we receive the Torah, we will do and we will hear. So Rashi explains, this is taken from a verse. I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me, but it's taken from a verse where it says that the angels first do and then they listen. And that we were, in a sense, copying the angels because they do and then they try to understand. And so that was like, wow, what a high level we reached when we received the Torah. We were like angels. But nonetheless, we're told we have to choose that to make his will our will. And so the concept of ratzo v'shov, running and returning, which we've identified with the basic dynamic of all life. Remember, nefesh chaya means a living being. And so life is connected to movement. Where there's movement, there's life. So as long as the heart is beating and we are breathing, there's life. And even sad to say, when God forbid someone is put on a machine to keep them alive, as long as the heart is beating and the person is breathing, even if it's artificially, they're still considered alive. So life has to do with movement. So this concept of running and returning, the tides running and returning, the breath, the heart, the seasons, everything is running and returning. But it's taken from the vision of Ezekiel, who sees angels running and returning. But the Gemara explains, like, how do we understand, what were they running to and what were they returning to? So it says in the Gemara that these angels, they wanted to be close to God. And so they would run towards God, and they would, as it were, peek over the horizon, and they would get a vision of the Shekhinah, and it would elicit so much awe that they would run back down, and then they want to do it again. And so these angels were in constant running and returning. But it's explained that they weren't going anywhere. They were just in the same dynamic. They were running and returning. There was no spontaneity. There was no change happening. Whereas a human being, with all of the problems that we have from free will, which are many, it still gives us something that even the angels don't have. So right before the class, I just flashed on something that in different circumstances, we've shown the form of the letter Aleph. And it represents and symbolizes so many different opposites. So this is an Aleph as it's written in the Torah. And in one hand, this is God, and this is human beings, and this is the Torah that connects. This is spiritual, and this is physical, and this is the soul between them. This is what we've learned many, many times. This is what's called olamot, nishamot, elokut, worlds, souls, and divinity. These are the upper waters. These are the lower waters. And this is the firmament in between them. And many, many, many other connections. This is man. This is woman. This is the covenant of marriage between them. But in preparation for this class, I was thinking that in a certain way, with this word chaya, that's connecting animal, human, and angel together. So here, this could represent angels, animals, but it's the human being that bridges both of them. And that's why the first letter of the word for human being is the Aleph, because the Adam bridges the spiritual and the physical, the soul and the body, the upper levels of the soul, the Yechida and the Chaya, and here's we could say that all the higher levels of the soul, and here is the Nefesh down here. And it's given over in many different ways that one of the main purposes of mitzvot in general is to connect the body with the soul and the lower levels of the soul, especially the nefesh, with the chaya, with the higher levels. And I should mention that usually when we talk about the chaya as the fourth level of soul, it's connected to ratzon, to will. And that's why this idea of free will is so important when we're trying to make this comparison between animal, human, and angel. So I think this is a good place to wrap this up with a bracha that really we should take like the best of the animal world, the best of the angelic world, the best of the human world, and we should combine them all together. And there's a basis for this blessing. And for those who were part of the mysteries of creation, we learned this in great depth when it says in the Torah, God says, let us make man in our image and likeness. So we had an entire class on who is the us, who is God talking to? Let us make man. And so one of the explanations is that God asked all of the different levels of creation to play a part in the creation of a human being. And that really is the essence of what we're talking about tonight, that the human being is unique because on one hand, it has the attributes and even the good parts of the animal world. And it has the positive, good parts of the angelic world, but it's put together in a unique way that only a human being has. And also, for those who were part of the Soul and Consciousness series that we did on Tuesday, so there we went to great lengths to show that also the vegetable kingdom has a certain level of chiyut, it's alive, and therefore has a certain level of nefesh, even though in the Torah itself, it doesn't attribute a nefesh to the vegetable kingdom, but nonetheless, there most certainly is a level of consciousness, and that part is the idea of growth. That the first living things that are in the story of creation is the vegetable kingdom before the animal kingdom. And so we also incorporate the whole idea of growth. And then also we learned that the mineral world also, on a very deep, mystical, but also scientific way, because as we mentioned, they're now understanding that even individual atoms, individual electrons seem to be making decisions in a way that we don't exactly understand. Bracha, just wait 1 minute. And so my bracha to everyone is the human being is really a composite. Let us make man in our image. So a human being has the mineral, the vegetable, the animal, the human, the angelic, and of course the divine level. May we all learn to put it all together and truly be an image of God.